Hi, I'm Ztarli, and in this video I show you how I create custom brushes using Artflow for Android. So the best way to create brushes in Artflow is to use only black on a transparent background. You can change the opacity levels of the black so that the brush has different levels of opacity as you draw, but it's best not to use white at all if you can help it. So what I'm going to do here to start with is I'm going to draw a leaf pattern with my brush and just using different opacity levels to show you what it actually looks like and how to actually create a brush. So I'm not going to spend much time on this. I sort of put a bit of effort into it, and then the second half I got just super lazy and just smudged it all together just to show you what it's like. It's also a good idea to have it filling up as much of a square space as possible to maximize the amount of space you're going to get out of the brush, but try not to have the brush touching the edges of the square for the actual shape of the brush itself. For texture it's different, but for the actual brush shape we want it to not be touching the edges of the square. Once you have your image ready, you then need to grab your select tool and select the whole part of the image you'd like to create into a brush. Make sure you click the copy button at the top, and then we're going to go to the brush tool and we'll select the little man on the end. So we go to custom brushes and then you click on the plus symbol and you'll find yourself on the new brush screen. Now you'll have two areas in which you can add images to create the shape of the brush and the texture. To start with, we're just going to go with the shape. So you click on the plus, and then I'm going to select clipboard because I have something copied to my clipboard. Alternatively, if you already have an image saved somewhere, you can load it in from your gallery. There's also a gallery of the brushes that came with Artflow. So if you go to the library, you'll find all of them there. You'll also find any brushes that you've used in or created in the past. It does actually save them to the library as well. So any images you've used for brushes in the past will also be in the library. Once you've got your desired shape and or texture loaded in, you click the next button and you'll be presented with a bunch of different sliders you can use to customize how you'd like your brush to be. There's also a blend option right down the bottom. Once you're done, you click the done button, and don't forget to give it a name. If you have forgotten, you can always go in and edit it and give it a name afterwards. And there you have it. You've created your very own brush. It's pretty fun to do this. I do recommend having a fiddle around with all the settings in the sliders. One thing to keep in mind is if you restore your brush to the default settings, it restores it to the settings you originally saved it as, so the very first time you went through the process. So if you make changes to the brush afterwards that you'd like to keep, it might actually be better just to recreate the whole brush and save it again, or save a copy of it. As you can see, this brush didn't turn out too bad. It's actually not a bad sort of foliage brush, even though I didn't spend much time on it. If you want a more angular brush, you can use the rectangle tool or circle tool just to create a fairly solid brush. And obviously if it's solid black, it's not going to have any difference in opacity levels in the brush itself. So I'll just show you here. I've just made a rectangle and I've just selected it and copied it and pasted it into the brush tool. I've just put a scatter on it, and you'll see that when I draw with it, I've got like pen pressure sensitivity on, so it does sort of go light to dark, but that's just because of the pen pressure. It's not because of the brush type itself, because it's just one solid black. It's just going to be like if I turned the pen pressure off, there'd just be solid color here all the time. If you turn the scattering off, it just becomes a pretty standard brush. I'm now going to use the symmetry tool to create a patterned brush. So by turning this on, I don't have to do a lot of work to create a fairly complicated pattern. And again, I've just got just black on a transparent background, and I'm just drawing a couple of random patterns here. And then I'll use the fill tool to fill in parts of this shape but I'll turn the opacity down on my fill tool. So you see when I put it in, it's not solid black, it's grey, but that's just because it's black with less opacity. You can also change the colour of the background, which is what I've just done there by clicking on the circle at the very bottom of the layer window. Then I've selected the whole thing using the select square tool or rectangle tool. I've copied it and then I paste it into the shape for the new brush section. And again, I'm just playing around with the settings here. I want to make this sort of like a scatter brush. So I'm just trying to turn up the scattering as much as possible. And you can see on the actual brush stroke itself, the different layers of opacity I've created by using that fill tool. Now this isn't scattery enough. I'd like there to be more, like a more speckledy sort of look to it. So I'm actually going to copy this and then paste it into a new layer and just put a couple of different ones there and rotate them a bit. So they actually have several of the same shape in the one brush so that I can create a larger amount of particles in the brush, the scatter brush I'm creating. So again, copy, paste it into the brush. Then you just adjust the settings here. So I'm just going to go to my scattering and my jitter and rotate it. And you can see that when I scatter it now, because there's more than one image on that brush layer, I get much denser particles, which is what I was after. I've kind of made this look like some kind of virus cell or something, but it's still an interesting brush. So I kind of like how this turned out too. I think I'll probably keep this brush as well. It makes some kind of interesting particle effects. For this next part, I'm going to show you how to create a brush from an image. So first thing you want to do is take all the color out of it. So I'm going to turn the saturation all the way down using hue saturation. I'm also going to invert the colors so it's easier for me to see the white sky. I'm now going to select just the part of the image I want, which is the dark cloud in the middle. And I'm going to try and get rid of all that gray around the cloud. So I'm going to turn the contrast up so there's a harsher line between the two. And then I'm going to use the select tool, the magic tool, and I'm going to select that gray area. And you can see it's just selected that one color of gray, and then I've used the cut tool to remove it. Then tidy it up with the erase tool, and now I'm going to resize it so it's much more of a square shape. So again, I'm maximizing the amount of brush that I fit on it. You don't have to do this, but it does mean, you're going to have a smaller brush if it's not taking up as much space as possible. Now, when we actually load this into the brush tool, you're going to have to do something different because this is not a transparent image. It's black. It's made out of black and white, not just black on a transparent background. You actually need to change the settings when you load the brush in. When you load it in, you'll see it is a solid color. You'll need to click on the little cog at the top. And then once the cog opens, you need to change it to intensity instead of alpha. And then you'll see that it changes to include the black and white components of your brush. And you can create the brush normally from there. Next, we're going to have a look at creating textures for your brush, which you do need to do things slightly different for the texture part. So I've just loaded in a photo and I've removed all of the saturation from it, so it's just black and white. Again, if you want to use this as a brush, you'll have to keep in mind, because it's not black with no other color in it, it's black and white, you would have to make sure you select intensity if you're going to use this for a brush. We're just going to use this for a texture for the brush. So again, we'll go to the custom brushes. I'm actually going to use a brush from the library for the actual shape of the brush. So I've just clicked library and selected a fuzzy brush and copied my texture into the texture layer here. And then you just make adjustments as normal again. You can now see that I've got a circular fuzzy brush that has a heavy texture on it. And you just change whatever you want. If you want it to be more scattery, it's just adding a bit of texture to your brush shape. So now you'll see that when I paint with this brush, it does have a distinct texture to it. Again, I kind of really like how this brush turned out, so I'm probably going to keep this brush for later use. For the libraries, there is a texture library and a brush library. So if you don't want to actually make your own textures or make your own brush shapes, you can simply just, when you want to create a new brush, click on the library option and select your brush shape, and then click on texture and select your texture. As I mentioned before, if you do create a new brush with your own texture and your own brush shape, it will actually save those to the library in the custom section, so you'll actually always have access to any new textures or shapes that you create for brushes. Now I'm just going to show you how to create a brush that has a texture without using the texture option. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make this texture shape a circular one, because I don't want to have a harsh edge to my brush. So I've just used the circle tool to create a template, and then I'll just be erasing around the shape so that I'm only left with a circle that has a soft edge to it, but still retains the actual texture from the photo I took. Now I've got the texture down to the way I wanted it to be, so it's got a little bit of a fuzziness around the outside. I'll grab my select tool, I'll select the whole thing, and then I'll copy it, and again, custom brushes, click the plus button and just hit the plus on the shape to load the shape in. Now this is actually what I first discovered, the difference between having a black and white image and just a black image. You can see it is solid white, despite the fact that when I look at the picture, there are different values there. So that's when I discovered you need to change it to intensity so that you do still get the black and white values in your brush. Now just fiddling around with my sliders again, I'm going to add a bit of space between the brush strokes for this, because I want to be able to see some of that texture I've added into my brush. And then I'll just give it a test run and see how it looks. Doing things this way does still create interesting brushes, but the texture is definitely not as pronounced as it would be if I'd actually used the texture function in the brush settings. But you can still see there is a bit of texture there as part of the brush. Now here I'm just going to quickly talk about what you shouldn't do. So here I've got a image of texture, which is light at the top and dark at the bottom. So I've selected the whole image and copied it as normal. When I actually go to use it though, because it's darker at the bottom than it is at the top, you can clearly see my texture has a solid line on it. And so you need to be careful that when you're using textures, that you try and create an image that's sort of same gradient all the way across, so you don't have a light end and a dark end. The second thing you need to be careful of is with textures, is that your texture goes right to the edge. So in this case, I've created a border of transparency around the edge of my texture, and I've added it into my brush. And you'll see that when I actually paint with this brush, because there's transparency at the edge, I actually have created places where the brush doesn't paint. And that's pretty much everything for my brush tutorial. Let me know if you found it useful. Don't forget to give it a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to my channel for more. I also do have a playlist of all my how I use Artflow videos if you'd like to check those out as well. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!